What's going on, guys? Carlos checking in on you. This is the weathering portion of the tutorial. The Ultramarine is now painted. I made some adjustments to him. If you look at the armor, I kind of tweaked the non-metallic metal, and I ended up having to paint more of the bolter than I thought I would. This guy's kind of holding it away from his body, so that was kind of a surprise. And the leather in particular, after I had applied that glaze, I was looking at it after the fact out of the video, and I was like, wow, that's a glaze all right. So I had to dial it down a little bit. A lot of the time, my most comfortable painting distance is a lot closer than I do for the for YouTube. So sometimes I kind of discover things after the fact. So anyways, you can see below this guy, I'm not going to have this in frame the whole time because my iPhone likes to focus on stuff that's usually not what I'm painting. So this is the cardboard with the oil paint applied, and you can see the reason for the cardboard is that when we apply the oil paint, it has a carrier oil. The carrier oil is going to kind of disperse into the cardboard, and for people who are oil painters, maybe they want the carrier oil in there, but for us, we want to get as much of that out as we can. This will reduce the gloss, and it'll also decrease the drying time. And I cover a lot of that in my oil videos, so this is just kind of like a refresher. This color is going to be like a dust color. That's Naples Yellow Light. This is raw umber. It's going to be just kind of a generic dark weathering color. We'll mix together the two. We'll make different shades of kind of dirt, especially on the boot areas. And then this is going to be this is burnt sienna, which is going to be a rust color. So here are the colors right here. These are artist grade. So if you go to Michael's, these, depending on which color you buy, these are going to be, between 10 to, some of them go up to almost $30 or $40 for a tube if you buy like some of the cadmium colors. This is another type of paint you can get. This would be considered a student quality. At Michael's, you can get these. These are adequate for what we want to do. So if you don't want to spend a lot of money initially and you want to kind of just feel your way into kind of using oil paints for weathering, if you get a few of these tubes, it won't break the bank. I think they started around $7 or $8, and with a 40% off coupon, if you go every day after work, pretty soon you're going to have a decent collection of colors for just a few bucks. And I don't know, in Europe, don't really know. I'm not familiar with the brands. I know of a few, but they're mostly Spanish, so Spanish people or Spanish-speaking people probably will not be watching the video. But if you have a place where you can get, some decent quality paints, then get those. And this brand, Winsor & Newton, they're pretty much ubiquitous as far as oil painting goes. Some good colors to start with would be like burnt umber or raw umber. This color is very versatile. I prefer it. I would recommend getting this color before you got like just a pure white. The pure white they both serve the same purpose. This just allows you a little bit more. I would say it's not as kind of doesn't affect the surface the same way white does. It's still gonna look real dirty. Look a lot like dirt if you use it, but I prefer it over white. Another good color to have is burnt sienna. This color is a great rust color, and Michael Rinaldi, which fans of the channel might already have heard me mention his name many times. He says that this color in particular is one of his favorites, and in turn it is one of mine. Good materials. Good tools are important to getting good results. So this brush is a low Cornell 7020 Ultra Round. I just recently bought some of these. I've known about them. They're synthetic bristle. They're not very expensive. They're about $5 per brush, but they're well, I guess maybe that is expensive. I mean, you could probably buy it for $5. You get about 20 brushes at Walmart or whatever. So they are a little bit more expensive, but for me, like, I buy Sable brushes, and I'm used to brushes costing between $5 to $17. So these are probably on the lower end of that, and they're high quality. I've already used this one quite a bit. I've used this one for painting a lot of figures, and you can see it's got some color in it, but nothing wrong with the point. This one's brand new. This is going to be this brush is going to be my color application brush. This brush is going to be my blending brush. And as far as the thinner goes, this thinner is kind of a mix of artist thinner and clean strip from Home Depot. This is Sans Odor from Winsor & Newton, which is Winsor & Newton's kind of version of odorless mineral spirits, and this is the other part is odorless mineral spirits from Home Depot. If you don't have that kind of stuff, or if you're maybe in a different country, you want high quality artists mineral spirits, or if you can't rely on like the quality of your local hardware store or whatever, you could get, I guess, some of the actual like MIG Ammo. They make a odorless thinner that should be safe for this kind of use. A small piece of double-sided tape. This is actually a large piece of double-sided tape, and I'm going to stick it onto the back of the palette. That way when I'm mixing and doing stuff, it doesn't like fly around. So stick it right here, and I'll probably attach it to my cutting mat. So it's going to go off camera now and live in its home for the next day or two. Oh, and the oil palette should last you about 2 or 3 days per creation, and it doesn't take very much oil paint. I've been using this oil paint in particular. This is 8 or 9 years old at this point, and I've used just a fraction of it. So it's a decent investment as far as weathering materials go. You will get lots of use out of it. So in the next section, we'll probably begin the weathering. Thanks, guys. So we're ready to begin the main weathering. I've just got to the side. I'm going to wipe off my brushes with extra mineral spirit. It's important that you use the appropriate amount of thinner when you're doing this. You don't want to have too much. So first I'm going to mix my Naples Light with some raw umber. And again, I want to have just a little bit of thinner on the brush. And I'm going to go for maybe just a light gray color, brownish gray. And then for my blending brush, I'm going to do the same. So right now it's completely dry. We get a little thinner on it. And I want to draw out almost all the thinner. And that's, right there, nice and dry. And I'm going to keep it that way to do my blending. So right now, brush is going in my mouth or to the side. And I'm going to apply just a touch right here on the boot. And this stuff, a little bit goes a long way. Just put a little bit around here. A little bit right there. Let me zoom in a little. This is as slow and as methodical a process as you want to make it. It's definitely not, I would describe it as a faster technique. It doesn't take really a long time once you get into the swing of things, but you have time to think about what you're doing, and you also have kind of, I don't know, I think of it as more of a leisurely kind of pace. as opposed to, I don't know, some of the other, like if you do acrylics and stuff, you just you get one shot at it. You get to apply it, and then you kind of get to make a quick judgment of whether or not it's going to work, and then you can get rid of it with water, or you can just leave it and then it dries, and then that's it. All right, so here is the oil, the first application. That's zoomed in too much. I'm going to back off a little bit. And I'm going to take my dry thinner brush, and I'm just going to kind of gently work the oils under the surface. The surface I'm working on is a matte surface. It is pretty rough. That's definitely the preferred working surface for this method. The matte surface is going to give you a lot of texture for your oil paint to kind of dig into and seep into. So it's important to go with just a very small amount at this time. And I'm just blending it in softly. And we're going to work light to dark. So that means that I'll start with lighter colors, and then I'll add subsequently darker colors. And now you can see that the surface has been kind of subtly shifted towards some lightness. And we'll just continue to add that, kind of adding that dusty texture. Maybe one more dusty pass, and then maybe finally with the burnt umber. And something to remember is that the closer parts of them, oh, this is almost completely dry. No wonder I didn't get any on the brush. The closer the model is to the ground, or at least the parts that are closer to the ground, are going to be more heavily weathered as opposed to the places that are high up on the model, like the head and that kind of thing. If you really want to kind of adhere to the more realistic side of things, if you want to, splash weathering all over your model, I guess I couldn't stop you, but it's not going to look quite as authentic if his whole head and his upper torso is covered in like filth and grime. So bear that in mind. And again, I'm adding, this is a mix of Naples yellow light and raw umber. I finally got to some raw umber that wasn't dry. Raw umber and burnt umber dry very quickly. I don't know why that is, but I know that it's true. Colors that are reddish, and also the Naples yellow light, because of the type of oil it uses, take a very long time to dry. So one of the reasons that we talked about our cardboard palette being so useful is that it really allows us to apply this stuff, and then it'll reduce the drying time significantly. In addition, there's a much smaller amount of material being applied. There's a smaller amount of material on the brush, and there's a smaller amount of material applied to the model. That'll reduce drying time as well. Alright, so I applied a little bit up here around the boot. I'm just going to blend it. I can't really, to my eyes, I don't see a whole lot there, and many times this effect is going to be built up very subtly in a lot of different layers. But if you look at this, you see his ankle. It's got some dustiness. That's just blue. Doesn't really have that. I did apply I think I applied like a Tamiya flat coat over this, so he almost has like a little bit of a cloudy sheen to him anyways to begin with. So we'll refer back to this. I'm only going to do one side, and we'll see what it looks like. But I can see, now that I turn it over, I can see that it's definitely starting to build up in those corners. I'm not sure if that's transmitted on the camera. Now, people who have more exposure to these kinds of techniques might be familiar with words like filters and sludge washes and oil washes, and those are definitely different techniques, and they're viable. People can get good results with those. Myself, I've been trying to learn the quote-unquote OPR method, the oil paint rendering, which is, if you have a chance, you can pick up some of Michael Rinaldi's books, or any of them really. His latest one, SM03, is about building a Gundam, and he that's kind of his claim to fame, I guess, is the OPR and the hairspray chipping. He didn't invent hairspray chipping, but I guess he refers to it himself as one of his signatures. And OPR, his oil paint method, is also, I mean, it's pretty individualized to him. I've seen other people kind of do the same thing, but not in the same way. So they apply small amounts of oil paint to, oh, did I just touch it? They apply small amounts of oil paint to the figure, but they do it all over, and it's called like either a dot filter or I don't know, something like that. And it's, people put like different colors all over the miniature and then kind of blend it downwards. So I mean, at first blush, maybe this is just a long way around of doing what those other people do, which is applying lots of different colors all over the model and then kind of blending it into the surface. But this is definitely more targeted. This is more like painting, like figure painting almost. You're focusing on certain areas and you're kind of like using the oil paint to enhance its features while add maybe effects. So you're creating contrast, and you're also creating, wear and battle damage and that kind of thing. So it's definitely, it's when used in that kind of targeted of a fashion, it's a lot different than, I would say, most of the other armor techniques. And with good reason, a lot of the armor techniques, I think, are more for a larger subject. So that's probably why many people don't hone in as much. But I think for figure painting, it's pretty, at least for doing weathering on miniatures for Warhammer, it's useful because it's a very precise technique that allows you to work at a small scale. And all these words and all these ideas are mostly Michael Rinaldi's. I'm just trying to, do a really bad job of paraphrasing it. So yeah, I think it definitely applies to figures. That's too much oil, or yeah, that's too much thinner. It can be useful for doing figures, and you can, like, one of the things that I think. Now I'm going to speak for myself here. One of the pitfalls that I can get into is that you can kind of obsess so much on one area. You kind of go real far, and then you look at the rest of it and you're like, wow, I'm going to have to, what did I even do to the rest of the figure? Or what will I do to get to that result? And that's definitely something that I imagine will come with experience. So this is not really like, it's not like the easiest thing to get the hang of, because you need to keep everything in somewhat kind of balance. But anyways, we're getting really far afield. But in general, this is easy to do, but difficult to master. So when you first start applying these, it's gonna, you're gonna notice right away that, oh, darn it. You're gonna notice right away that the oil paint is very strong. Like just a tiny amount of oil paint is gonna create a massive stain on the surface. So the first stage is learning kind of like how much to even have on your brush. The second stage is learning how to make it look convincing. All right, so I've added a lot of dust all around the foot, and I could further enhance that, but now I'm going to move on with the burnt umber. The raw umber, I'm just going to go with as pure raw umber as I can get. And I'm going to add in the darkest kind of portions to this. Actually, it's still got a lot of Naples yellow in it. And I'm just going to let's do something that's not going to be as hard to notice. So let's do some shading over here on the Well, that's already really dark. Maybe the bottom of the knee right here. We can see, you can see I'm putting in those small colors. And up here, under this knee guard. And these areas kind of with the zenithal highlighting approach I've already chosen, it's kind of already in a great deal of shadow. But we can enhance that. And then here at the bottom of this, I don't even know what to call this, ankle part, I'm going to apply a little bit there and some into the cracks here. And we don't want to cover up everything that we did with the dust. Otherwise, that's one of the other things, like part of learning how to use this is how to keep everything kind of visible. Otherwise, if all the colors kind of blend together, it gets a little muddy. It gets a little hard to figure out what we're doing or what we're trying to communicate. So these chips, the black and brown chips that I've added, around these chips are where I'm going to provide some of the more heavier weathering. And that is one of the other things that we are doing is we're using the chips to kind of guide where we're applying these effects. So a little bit here, and towards the crevices it's going to be a little darker, and up here. And since this is kind of a combination of techniques, this is acrylic painting and oil painting. I mean, I've already done the lining, I've already done a lot of the highlighting. You can use oil painting for, or oil painting techniques for doing a lot of that work. You can do washes. You can also affect the surface color. You can shift the surface color in, like miniature painting, people refer to that as glazing. And in armor modeling, they call it filters. They're slightly different. A filter usually, well, no, I mean, part of what filters do is the same thing as what glazes do in miniature painting, which is provide like a, kind of like a unifying layer and also enhancing maybe richness of a particular color. So that stage would occur at different points in the process. For us, you know, I've already given this thing a once over in the miniature, you know, the acrylics that I like to, the techniques that I wanted to apply, following the roadmap that I laid out when I painted the other lieutenant. But if you wanted, you could always do a lot of the lining and things like that with the oil paint. So that would be something like this. You get your color brush, you get some burnt umber, I keep saying burnt umber, raw umber, and you know, get a little thinner, mix it in, and then maybe a little bit more so it's nice and fluid on the brush. And then you could just put it into the crevice. Now this isn't really, it's not going to flow the way an actual, if you're mixing a wash, would flow. It might be a little bit dark. If you wanted to mix up a wash with oil paint, like a liner or a pin wash, it's like about 70% thinner and 30% paint. This wash that I put in the crack right there, it was pretty fluid, but it's going to be a heavier, lining effect. So I may need to go back in there with my blending brush and kind of wick out some of that paint. But that's something that you can do. And you can see up here on this coil right here, I am going to thin it down, but I can do the same thing on the coil. And you'll see how it'll flow, hopefully, into the cracks and the crevices. Oh, see, there it goes. It's flowing, following everywhere. One of the things that having a matte surface, though, is that sometimes the wash will flow into areas that you don't want it to, and that's part of why I'm doing the OPR, or oil paint rendering method, is because we're not going to rely on that capillary effect to take the wash where we want it to. We're just going to put it exactly where we want it and work with it in that area. Okay, so I got called away. Had important dad duties to take care of. Now I've added the raw umber. I may dial it back in certain areas, in particular up here on the knee guard where we placed it. Oh, got a hair on there. I'm just going to diffuse it slightly. And again, this, wow, picking up a lot of hair. Must be from the paper towel. So that kind of little dab that I put on there, it's turning into, you know, kind of a big section. Fortunately, this area is dark, so it's just kind of gonna blend in with the rest of it. Sometimes the camera will pick up the tone that color imparts to the armor plate that you apply it to, so it's not necessarily in vain. If you wanted, you could put maybe a little bit more dust right here on this inside area, which I probably will do. It's, you know, as I discussed in the last video, you know, I mean, tutorials and things like that, we try to, at least I try to, you know, give something to somebody that they could maybe, I'm not aiming for people to be able to do this, you know, to be able to repeat this exactly. What I'm aiming for is to kind of give people ideas and also to kind of promote them feeling confident to try stuff in their own painting. That's what some of this is to do. But I mean, hopefully what I'm doing is relatively clear, so if you wanted to do it exactly, you could, but that's not necessarily my aim. My aim is to try to help people kind of branch out. A lot of times I think that beginners in particular, and I know this stuff very well because I was like the beginnerest of beginner. The people, when you're starting out, like, you really you focus on like recipes and how are people doing things and how much time did it take and all that stuff, and really like the whole fun of this, the whole point of this is to just kind of play with color and play with, you know, play with light on the figure. To me, a lot of the times, like I like to go to Michael's and just kind of look at the colors, and I like to think about colors and planning about putting colors on stuff. I mean, I just enjoy the oil paint. So, and in the same way, like painting for me is pretty fun too. So that's like the process itself, I believe, is the fun part. I don't even know why I'm talking about that. So I'm going to get a little bit of burnt sienna. Now this color, it does take a while for it to dry on the oil palette, so if you put on some burnt sienna, it's good for several days. You need to, however, when you're working with this color on top of blue, you have to exercise caution because this color is super duper powerful, and it's going to create like almost like a kind of a weird light green color anywhere you put it onto there, anywhere you put it onto the armor that's blue. So it's important that you kind of keep it very, very minimalistic and restrained. That's one of the things that I know to be true about burnt sienna, at least this burnt sienna. So I'm just doing a little bit of a streak, nothing major. And you know, I mean, I can't even tell you how much ink has been spilled on the internet about does power armor rust, how realistic is it, and blah blah blah. That's just, I don't know. There's not enough time to kind of talk about that stuff. So again, very small amounts here. Small amount right there. And some up here. And see, I believe on the sergeant, I believe on the lieutenant, what I did is that I actually used some acrylic paint to do some of the initial weathering. And then I went back and I also did oils, and I went back and I think I might have worked a little bit on the boots with pigments. And that's, you know, I wish I could give you like an exact recipe. Unfortunately, many times, like I say, it's not necessarily a straight line. So I hope that when you guys are watching this, you understand that like you don't necessarily need to follow rules or a recipe, but you do need to kind of have some knowledge of how these things are going to look once they're applied on the figure. When you do have that, you can kind of like develop your own plan. You can start to freestyle, and that's like experimentation is really, it's key, and also technique and mastery are key. Now, what I'm doing, none of the stuff that I'm doing is hard stuff to learn. None of the stuff is like very, like you don't have to worry about going back and forth really quickly and feathering edges or doing wet blending. Like that's not what this is. What this is all about kind of being able to select some good colors, and that's not too hard. And then sort of looking at the figure and kind of figuring out like, what kind of action is this guy seeing? What kind of where would his armor get chipped? How would the dirt hit his armor? That's not hard to learn. What I'm doing with this paintbrush is not anything special. It's just about understanding kind of how, or at least imagining how this would happen. And the internet for how suits of armor look, the kind of rusting that they get, video games and that kind of material that has science fiction subjects on it, and just kind of go through that and look at some of that stuff and how other people have done it and what you think is the most successful, and kind of just try to adapt it to your own painting. That's when the magic is going to happen. And one of the things that I talked about in the other video is that only through the mastery of these very simple techniques can you then like start to apply them in like a more of a strategic way, so you can kind of develop your plan and kind of make some adjustments as you go. And like I said, this in particular, this technique, I believe, is a relatively simple technique to learn. Once you sort of have the basics down, it's more about your judgment and how you use it. So, yeah, enough about that. Kind of got onto a little bit of a soapbox there. So, I think just for the final part, I might apply a little bit more dust down here, and then I'll go back and kind of work on that streak a little and show how you can kind of feather that little guy out. And see, that's again the great strength of this stuff, is that you don't have to worry about being ultra fast and having good technique. And that's good stuff to learn as far as acrylic painting goes, because when you do know that stuff, all the stuff can work together in concert. And as you develop both of those skills, you're going to add lots of layers to your work. It's going to look more realistic, and so on and so forth. It's just going to continue to build on itself, the skill sets. So anyhow, put a little bit of the dirt here. I'll have to come back and work on that. Not too much. All right, so we'll come back to our streak that we laid down. Make sure it's nice and clean. When I'm working on a streak like this, I'd want to make sure that all the previous colors were out of the brush. Now, some people use multiple brushes for multiple colors, but I ain't got it like that, if you know what I'm saying. So I got to use the same brush for most of my blending. So I'm just going to make sure it's thoroughly rinsed out, make sure there's no color in it, and then with the almost dry brush, I'm going to begin to work on the streak. Now you could leave it like that. It's actually, it wasn't the worst streak to begin with, but if you want to do multiple streaks along like an armor panel, you wouldn't necessarily want a ton of super dark streaks. And if you look at anything that is already, kind of really weathered in the real world, you're going to see there's already going to be like a ton of streaking. The other day I was passing by this excavator, and he took a picture of the bucket, and there was probably like 5 or 6 different layers of just dirt streaking, and it had only been sitting out for, I don't know, maybe a few days. So, yeah, look at the stuff around you. Now, Also, you want to make sure that you look at subjects that are similar to your subject. So maybe an abandoned excavator wouldn't be a one-to-one comparison to a Space Marine power armor, but if you don't have any other references, it can definitely help you. All right, so you see I feathered out the streak a teeny bit. I could continue to do that. I could add streaks all over this guy's ankle, but we're kind of getting a little long here, so hopefully this has answered some of those questions about how to do the weathering on the Space Marine. And if you have more questions, make sure you check out the other oil paint weathering video that I have up, and drop me a comment. You know, if you guys have questions, you can always you can send an email. I believe you can send a message on YouTube, you can send me an email, or you can email the Facebook page. It's Scarlet and Sable on Facebook, and you know, maybe if I get enough, I'll have like a question and answer. That's another thing. I'm kind of thinking about what direction to take my channel in. I don't have a ton of subscribers, but I like to think that they're loyal. So for the 5 of you guys out there watching it, you know, if you guys have some suggestions or some future tutorials you'd like to see, go ahead and let me know. I'd like to hear what you have to say. So thanks for watching, and looks like we're going in a nice direction on this leg. You can see on this leg, still pretty clean. I mean, the work that I've done with the acrylic is there already, but on this other leg, you can see that heavy staining that's starting to build up with the oil paint. So, all right, guys, less is more. Keep painting, keep believing, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.